Section 17 of A General History of the Pirates by Charles Johnson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Of Captain Bartholomew Roberts and his crew, Part 3. And now, seeing the disadvantages they were under for pursuing the account, that is, a small vessel ill repaired and without provisions or stores, they resolved one and all, with the little supplies they could get, to proceed for the West Indies, not doubting to find a remedy for all these evils and to retrieve their loss. In the latitude of Deseada, one of the islands, they took 2 sloops, which supplied them with provisions and other necessaries, and a few days afterwards took a brigantine belonging to Rhode Island, and then proceeded to Barbados, off of which island they fell in with a Bristol ship of 10 guns, in her voyage out, from whom they took abundance of clothes, some money, 25 bales of goods, 5 barrels of powder, a cable, hawser, 10 casks of oatmeal, 6 casks of beef, and several other goods, besides 5 of their men, and after they had detained her for 3 days, let her go, who being bound for the above said island, she acquainted the governor with what had happened as soon as she arrived. Whereupon a Bristol galley that lay in the harbour was ordered to be fitted out with all imaginable expedition, of 20 guns and 80 men, there being then no man of war upon that station, and also a sloop with 10 guns and 40 men. The galley was commanded by one Captain Rogers of Bristol, and the sloop by Captain Graves of that island, and Captain Rogers by a commission from the governor was appointed commodore. The second day after Rogers sailed out of the harbour, he was discovered by Roberts, who, knowing nothing of their design, gave them chase. The Barbados ships kept an easy sail till the pirates came up with them, and then Roberts gave them a gun, expecting they would have immediately struck to his piratical flag, but instead thereof he was forced to receive the fire of a broadside, with 3 huzzas at the same time, so that an engagement ensued, but Roberts, being hardly put to it, was obliged to crowd all the sail the sloop could bear to get off. The galley, sailing pretty well, kept company for a long while, keeping a constant fire, which galed the pirate. However, at length, by throwing over their guns and other heavy goods, and thereby lightening the vessel, they with much ado got clear. But Roberts could never endure a Barbados man afterwards, and when any ships belonging to that island fell in his way, he was more particularly severe to them than others. Captain Roberts sailed in the sloop to the island of Dominico, where he watered and got provisions of the inhabitants, to whom he gave goods in exchange. At this place he met with 13 Englishmen who had been set ashore by a French garde la coste belonging to Martinico, taken out of 2 New England ships that had been seized as prize by the said French sloop. The men willingly entered with the pirates, and it proved a seasonable recruit. They stayed not long here, though they had immediate occasion for cleaning their sloop, but did not think this a proper place, and herein they judged right, for the touching at this island had like to have been their destruction, because they having resolved to go away to the Grenada Islands for the aforesaid purpose, by some accident it came to be known to the French colony, who sent word to the governor of Martinico. He equipped and manned 2 sloops to go in quest of them. The pirates sailed directly for the Granadillos, and hauled into a lagoon at Corvoco, where they cleaned with unusual dispatch, staying but a little above a week, by which expedition they missed of the Martinico sloops only a few hours, Roberts sailing overnight, that the French arrived the next morning. This was a fortunate escape, especially considering that it was not from any fears of their being discovered that they made so much haste from the island, but that, as they had the impudence themselves to own, for the want of wine and women. Thus narrowly escaped, they sailed for Newfoundland, and arrived upon the banks the latter end of June, 1720. They entered the harbour of Trepassey, with their black colours flying, drums beating, and trumpets sounding. There were 22 vessels in the harbour, which the men all quitted upon the sight of the pirate, and fled ashore. It is impossible particularly to recount the destruction and havoc they made there, burning and sinking all the shipping except a Bristol galley, and destroying the fisheries and stages of the poor planters without remorse or compunction, for nothing is so deplorable as power in mean and ignorant hands. It makes men wanton and giddy, unconcerned at the misfortunes they are imposing on their fellow creatures, and keeps them smiling at the mischiefs that bring themselves no advantage. They are like madmen that cast firebrands, arrows, and death, and say, Are we not in sport? Roberts manned the Bristol galley he took in the harbour, and mounted 16 guns on board her, and cruising out upon the banks he met with 9 or 10 sail of French ships, all which he destroyed, except one of 26 guns, which they seized and carried off for their own use. This ship they christened the Fortune, and leaving the Bristol galley to the Frenchmen, they sailed away in company with the sloop, on another cruise, and took several prizes, that is, the Richard of Bideford, Jonathan Whitfield, master, the Willing Mind of Poole, the Expectation of Topsham, and the Samuel, Captain Carey of London. Out of these ships they increased their company, by entering all the men they could well spare in their own service. The Samuel was a rich ship, and had several passengers on board who were used very roughly, in order to make them discover their money, threatening them every moment with death if they did not resign everything up to them. They tore up the hatches and entered the hold like a parcel of furies, and with axes and cutlashes cut and broke open all the bales, cases, boxes they could lay their hands on, and when any goods came upon deck that they did not like to carry aboard, instead of tossing them into the hold again, threw them overboard into the sea. All this was done with incessant cursing and swearing, more like fiends than men. They carried with them sails, guns, powder, cordage, and 8 or 9,000 pounds worth of the choicest goods, and told Captain Carey that they should accept of no act of grace, that the K and P might be damned with their acts of G for them. Neither would they go to Hope Point to be hanged up a sun-drying as Kidd's and Bradish's company were, but that if they should ever be overpowered they would set fire to the powder with a pistol, and go all merrily to hell together. After they had brought all the booty aboard, a consultation was held whether they should sink or burn the ship, but whilst they were debating the matter they spied a sail, and so left the Samuel to give her chase. At midnight they came up with the same, which proved to be a Snow from Bristol, bound for Boston, Captain Bowles, master. They used him barbarously because of his country, Captain Rogers, who attacked them off Barbados, being of the city of Bristol. July the 16th, which was 2 days afterwards, they took a Virginia man called the Little York, James Phillips, master, and the Love of Liverpool, which they plundered and let go. The next day a Snow from Bristol called the Phoenix, John Richards, master, met with the same fate from them, as also a brigantine, Captain Thomas, and a sloop called the Sudbury. They took all the men out of the brigantine and sunk the vessel. When they left the banks of Newfoundland they sailed for the West Indies, and the provisions growing short, they went for the latitude of the island Desiata to cruise, it being esteemed the likeliest place to meet with such ships as they used in their mirth to say, were consigned to them with supplies, and it has been very much suspected that ships have loaded with provisions at the English colonies on pretence of trading on the coast of Africa, when they have in reality been consigned to them, and though a show of violence is offered to them when they meet, yet they are pretty sure of bringing their cargo to a good market. However, at this time they missed with their usual luck, and provisions and necessaries becoming more scarce every day, they retired towards St. Christopher's, where being denied all succour or assistance from the government, they fired in revenge on the town and burnt 2 ships in the road, one of them commanded by Captain Cox of Bristol, and then retreated farther to the island of St. Bartholomew, where they met with much handsomer treatment, the governor not only supplying them with refreshments, but he and the chiefs caressing them in the most friendly manner, and the women, from so good an example, endeavoured to outvie each other in dress and behaviour to attract the good graces of such generous lovers that paid well for their favours. Sated at length with these pleasures, and having taken on board a good supply of fresh provisions, they voted unanimously for the coast of Guinea, and in the latitude of 22 north in their voyage thither, met with a French ship from Martinico, richly laden, and which was unlucky for the master, had a property of being fitter for their purpose than the banker. Exchange was no robbery, they said, and so after a little mock complaisance to monsieur for the favour he had done them, they shifted their men and took leave. This was their first royal fortune. In this ship Roberts proceeded on his designed voyage, but before they reached Guinea he proposed to touch at Brava, the southernmost of Cape Verde islands, and clean. But here again, by an intolerable stupidity and want of judgment, they got so far to leeward of their port that despairing to regain it or any of the windward parts of Africa, they were obliged to go back again with the trade wind for the West Indies, which had very near been the destruction of them all. Surinam was the place now designed for, which was at no less than 700 leagues distance, and they had but one hogshead of water left to supply 124 souls for that passage, a sad circumstance that eminently exposes the folly and madness among pirates, and he must be an inconsiderate wretch indeed who, if he could separate the wickedness and punishment from the fact, would yet hazard his life amidst such dangers as their want of skill and forecast made them liable to. Their sins, we may presume, were never so troublesome to their memories as now that inevitable destruction seemed to threaten them, without the least glimpse of comfort or alleviation to their misery. For with what face could wretches who had ravaged and made so many necessitous look up for relief? They had to that moment lived in defiance of the power that now alone they must trust for their preservation, and indeed without the miraculous intervention of Providence there appeared only this miserable choice, that is, a present death by their own hands, or a lingering one by famine. They continued their course, and came to an allowance of one single mouthful of water for 24 hours. Many of them drank their urine or sea water, which instead of allaying gave them an inextinguishable thirst that killed them. Others pined and wasted a little more time in fluxes and aporexies, so that they dropped away daily. Those that sustained the misery best were such as almost starved themselves, forbearing all sorts of food, unless a mouthful or two of bread the whole day, so that those who survived were as weak as it was possible for men to be, and alive. But if the dismal prospect they set out with gave them anxiety, trouble, or pain, what must their fears and apprehensions be when they had not one drop of water left, or any other liquor to moisten or animate? This was their case when, by the working of divine providence, no doubt, they were brought into soundings, and at night anchored in 7-fathom water. This was an inexpressible joy to them, and as it were fed the expiring lamp of life with fresh spirits. But this could not hold long. When the morning came they saw land from the masthead, but it was at so great a distance that it afforded but an indifferent prospect to men who had drank nothing for the last 2 days. However, they dispatched their boat away, and late the same night it returned, to their no small comfort, with a load of water, informing them that they had got off the mouth of Merowinga River on the coast of Surinam. One would have thought so miraculous an escape would have wrought some reformation, but alas, they had no sooner quenched their thirst, but they had forgot the miracle, till scarcity of provisions awakened their senses and bid them guard against starving. Their allowance was very small, and yet they would profanely say that Providence which had gave them drink would no doubt bring them meat also, if they would use but an honest endeavour. In pursuance of these honest endeavours they were steering for the latitude of Barbados, with what little they had left, to look out for more or starve, and in their way met a ship that answered their necessities, and after that a brigantine. The former was called the Greyhound, belonging to St. Christopher's and bound to Philadelphia, the mate of which signed the pirates' articles and was afterwards captain of the Ranger, consort to the Royal Fortune. Out of the ship and brigantine the pirates got a good supply of provisions and liquor, so that they gave over the designed cruise and watered at Tobago, and hearing of the 2 sloops that had been fitted out and sent after them at Covoko, they sailed to the island of Martinico to make the governor some sort of an equivalent for the care and expedition he had shown in that affair. It is the custom at Martinico for the Dutch interlopers that have a mind to trade with the people of the island to hoist their jacks when they come before the town. Roberts knew the signal, and being an utter enemy to them, he bent his thoughts upon mischief, and accordingly came in with his jack flying, which, as he expected, they mistook for a good market, and thought themselves happiest that could soonest dispatch off their sloops and vessels for trade. When Roberts had got them within his power, one after another, he told them he would not have it said that they came off for nothing, and therefore ordered them to leave their money behind, for that they were a parcel of rogues, and hoped they would always meet with such a Dutch trade as this was. He reserved 1 vessel to set the passengers on shore again, and fired the rest, to the number of 20. Roberts was so enraged at the attempts that had been made for taking of him by the governors of Barbados and Martinico, that he ordered a new jack to be made, which they ever hoisted after, with his own figure portrayed standing upon 2 skulls, and under them the letters A.B.H. and A.M.H., signifying a Barbadian's and a Martinican's head, as may be seen in the plate of Captain Roberts. At Dominico, the next island they touched at, they took a Dutch interloper of 22 guns and 75 men, and a brigantine belonging to Rhode Island, one Norton master. The former made some defence, till some of his men being killed, the rest were discouraged and struck their colours. With these two prizes they went down to Guadalupe and brought out a sloop and a French fly-boat laden with sugar. The sloop they burnt, and went on to Mune, another island, thinking to clean, but finding the sea ran too high there to undertake it with safety, they bent their course for the north part of Hispaniola, where at Bennett's Key, in the Gulf of Samana, they cleaned both the ship and the brigantine. For though Hispaniola be settled by the Spaniards and French, and is the residence of a president from Spain who receives and finally determines appeals from all the other Spanish West India islands, yet is its people by no means proportioned to its magnitude, so that there are many harbours in it, to which pirates may securely resort without fear of discovery from the inhabitants. Whilst they were here, two sloops came in, as they pretended, to pay Roberts a visit. The masters, whose names were Porter and Tuckerman, addressed the pirate as the Queen of Sheba did to Solomon, to wit, that having heard of his fame and achievements, they had put in there to learn his art and wisdom in the business of pirating, being vessels on the same honourable design with himself, and hoped, with the communication of his knowledge, they should also receive his charity, being in want of necessaries for such adventures. Roberts was won upon by the peculiarity and bluntness of these two men, and gave them powder, arms, and whatever else they had occasion for, spent 2 or 3 merry nights with them, and at parting said he hoped the Lord would prosper their handy works. They passed some time here after they had got their vessel ready, in their usual debaucheries. They had taken a considerable quantity of rum and sugar, so that liquor was as plenty as water, and few there were who denied themselves the immoderate use of it. Nay, sobriety brought a man under suspicion of being in a plot against the Commonwealth, and in their sense he was looked upon to be a villain that would not be drunk. This was evident in the affair of Henry Glasby, chosen master of the Royal Fortune, who with 2 others laid hold of the opportunity at the last island they were at to move off without bidding farewell to his friends. Glasby was a reserved, sober man, and therefore gave occasion to be suspected, so that he was soon missed after he went away, and a detachment being sent in quest of the deserters, they were all 3 brought back again the next day. This was a capital offence, and for which they were ordered to be brought to an immediate trial. Here was the form of justice kept up, which is as much as can be said of several other courts that have more lawful commissions for what they do. Here was no feeing of counsel, and bribing of witnesses was a custom not known among them. No packing of juries, no torturing and wresting the state of the law for by ends and purposes, no puzzling or perplexing the cause with unintelligible canting terms and useless distinctions, nor was their sessions burthened with numberless officers, the ministers of rapine and extortion, with ill-boding aspects, enough to fright Astrea from the court. The place appointed for their trials was the steerage of the ship, in order to which a large bowl of rum punch was made and placed upon the table. The pipes and tobacco being ready, the judicial proceedings began. The prisoners were brought forth, and articles of indictment against them read. They were arraigned upon a statute of their own making, and the letter of the law being strong against them, and the fact plainly proved, they were about to pronounce sentence, when one of the judges moved that they should first smoke the other pipe, which was accordingly done. All the prisoners pleaded for arrest of judgment very movingly, but the court had such an abhorrence of their crime that they could not be prevailed upon to show mercy, till one of the judges, whose name was Valentine Ashplant, stood up, and taking the pipe out of his mouth, said he had something to offer to the court in behalf of one of the prisoners, and spoke to this effect: "By God, Glasby shall not die, damn me if he shall." After this learned speech he sat down in his place and resumed his pipe. This motion was loudly opposed by all the rest of the judges in equivalent terms, but Ashplant, who was resolute in his opinion, made another pathetical speech in the following manner: "God damn you, gentlemen, I am as good a man as the best of you. Damn my soul, if ever I turned my back on any man in my life, or ever will, by God. Glasby is an honest fellow, notwithstanding this misfortune, and I love him. Devil damn me if I don't. I hope he'll live and repent of what he has done, but damn me if he must die, I will die along with him." And thereupon he pulled out a pair of pistols and presented them to some of the learned judges upon the bench, who, perceiving his argument so well supported, thought it reasonable that Glasby should be acquitted, and so they all came over to his opinion and allowed it to be law. But all the mitigation that could be obtained for the other prisoners was, that they should have the liberty of choosing any 4 of the whole company to be their executioners. The poor wretches were tied immediately to the mast, and there shot dead, pursuant to their villainous sentence. When they put to sea again, the prizes which had been detained only for fear of spreading any rumour concerning them, which had like to have been so fatal at Corvoco, were thus disposed of. They burnt their own sloop, and manned Norton's brigantine, sending the master away in the Dutch interloper, not dissatisfied. With the Royal Fortune and the brigantine, which they christened the Good Fortune, they pushed towards the latitude of Desiada, to look out for provisions, being very short again, and just to their wish, Captain Hingston's ill fortune brought him in their way, richly laden for Jamaica. Him they carried to Bermudas and plundered, and stretching back again to the West Indies, they continually met with some consignment or other, chiefly French, which stored them with plenty of provisions and recruited their starving condition. So that, stocked with this sort of ammunition, they began to think of something worthier their aim, for these robberies, that only supplied what was in constant expenditure, by no means answered their intentions, and accordingly they proceeded again for the coast of Guinea, where they thought to buy gold dust very cheap. In their passage thither they took numbers of ships of all nations, some of which they burnt or sunk, as the carriage or characters of the masters displeased them. Notwithstanding the successful adventures of this crew, yet it was with great difficulty they could be kept together under any kind of regulation, for being almost always mad or drunk, their behaviour produced infinite disorders, every man being in his own imagination a captain, a prince, or a king. When Roberts saw there was no managing of such a company of wild, ungovernable brutes by gentle means, nor to keep them from drinking to excess, the cause of all their disturbances, he put on a rougher deportment and a more magisterial carriage towards them, correcting whom he thought fit, and if any seemed to resent his usage, he told them they might go ashore and take satisfaction of him, if they thought fit, at sword and pistol, for he neither valued nor feared any of them. About 400 leagues from the coast of Africa, the brigantine, who had hitherto lived with them, in all amicable correspondence, thought fit to take the opportunity of a dark night and leave the Commodore, which leads me back to the relation of an accident that happened at one of the islands of the West Indies, where they watered before they undertook this voyage, which had like to have thrown their government, such as it was, off the hinges, and was partly the occasion of the separation. The story is as follows. Captain Roberts having been insulted by one of the drunken crew, whose name I forgot, he, in the heat of his passion, killed the fellow on the spot, which was resented by a great many others, but particularly one Jones, a brisk, active young man who died lately in the Marshalsea, and was his messmate. This Jones was at that time ashore watering the ship, but as soon as he came on board he was told that Captain Roberts had killed his comrade, upon which he cursed Roberts and said he ought to have served so himself. Roberts, hearing Jones' invective, ran to him with the sword and ran him into the body, who, notwithstanding his wound, seized the captain, threw him over a gun, and beat him handsomely. This adventure put the whole company in an uproar, and some taking part with the captain and others against him, there had like to have ensued a general battle with one another, like my Lord Tomont's cocks. However, the tumult was at length appeased by the mediation of the quartermaster, and as the majority of the company were of opinion that the dignity of the captain ought to be supported on board, that it was a post of honour, and therefore the person whom they thought fit to confer it on should not be violated by any single member, wherefore they sentenced Jones to undergo 2 lashes from every one of the company for his misdemeanour, which was executed upon him as soon as he was well of his wound. This severe punishment did not at all convince Jones that he was in the wrong, but rather animated him to some sort of a revenge, but not being able to do it upon Roberts's person on board the ship, he and several of his comrades correspond with Anstis, the captain of the brigantine, and conspire with him and some of the principal pirates on board that vessel to go off from the company. What made Anstis a malcontent was the inferiority he stood in with respect to Roberts. who carried himself with a haughty and magisterial air to him and his crew, he regarding the brigantine only as a tender, and as such left them no more than the refuse of their plunder. In short, Jones and his consort go on board of Captain Anstice on pretence of a visit, and there consulting with their brethren, they find a majority for leaving of Roberts, and so came to a resolution to bid a soft farewell, as they call it, that night, and to throw overboard whosoever should stick out. But they proved to be unanimous, and effected their design as above mentioned. I shall have no more to say of Captain Anstice till the story of Roberts is concluded. Therefore I return to him in the pursuit of his voyage to Guinea. The loss of the brigantine was a sensible shock to the crew, she being an excellent sailor and had 70 hands aboard. However, Roberts, who was the occasion of it, put on a face of unconcern at his ill conduct and mismanagement, and resolved not to alter his purposes upon that account. Roberts fell in to windward nigh the Senegal, a river of great trade for gum on this part of the coast, monopolized by the French, who constantly keep cruisers to hinder the interloping trade. At this time they had 2 small ships on that service, one of 10 guns and 65 men, and the other of 16 guns and 75 men, who, having got a sight of Mr. Roberts, and supposing him to be one of those prohibited traders, chased with all the sail they could make to come up with him. But their hopes, which had brought them very nigh, too late deceived them, for on the hoisting of Jolly Roger, the name they give their black flag, their French hearts failed, and they both surrendered without any, or at least very little, resistance. With these prizes they went into Sierra Leone, and made of one of them their consort by the name of the Ranger, and the other a store ship to clean by. Sierra Leone River disgorges with a large mouth, the starboard side of which drafts into little bays, safe and convenient for cleaning and watering. What still made it preferable to the pirates is that the traders settled here are naturally their friends. There are about 30 Englishmen in all, men who in some part of their lives have been either privateering, buccaneering, or pirating, and still retain and love the riots and humours common to that sort of life. They live very friendly with the natives, and have many of them, of both sexes, to be their grometas, or servants. The men are faithful, and the women so obedient that they are ready to prostitute themselves to whomsoever their masters shall command them. The Royal African Company has a fort on a small island called Bent's Island, but 'tis of little use, besides keeping their slaves, the distance making it incapable of giving any molestation to their starboard shore. Here lives at this place an old fellow who goes by the name of Crackers, who was formerly a noted buccaneer, and while he followed the calling, robbed and plundered many a man. He keeps the best house in the place, has 2 or 3 guns before his door, with which he salutes his friends, the pirates, when they put in, and lives a jovial life with him all the while they are there. End of section 17. Read by Sandra, near Montreal, 2023.